Welcome everybody to Recharging Resiliency Together. We have some great presenters today, some really good people and some really smart people. We're going to talk a lot about employment today. I see some old friends on here. Just want to say hello to everybody, and I see you, Greg, and I see you, Lori, and some other people that I've known for many years. I just want to say thank you for joining us today, and we are going to have some really good information come your way. I will tell you that I would like for everybody to keep their microphones muted if you can. If you do have a question during the presentation, feel free to pop it in the chat. And with this, we have a fairly small group, so I think Dr. Rumrell and Dr. Kathy Shepard-Jones will probably be fine if you all want to open that up and ask a question. Just if you're not asking a question, please stay muted. We're sponsored today. We're coming to you, of course, from the Human Development Institute. In a grant from the Christopher Reeve Foundation. And we have Mark Burdosian is in a short video for us, the kind of show what their involvement is. And as always, we'd like to thank the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation for their involvement. So I'm going to play this short video and then I'll come back and introduce you to our speakers.
Hi, I'm Mark Burdosian. I'm the director of the Quality of Life Grants Program at the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. The foundation is honored to be funding the Recharging Resiliency Together workshops. This funding is made available through the Reeve Foundation's special grants program entitled COVID-19, Addressing Social Isolation. Ongoing research on COVID-19 shows that social isolation and loneliness due to the coronavirus pandemic have been linked to many physical and mental health problems, including heart disease, diabetes, heart failure, stroke, dementia, anxiety, and depression. Surveys and data that we collected at the Reeve Foundation and also from our stakeholders in the field of paralysis research have indicated that social isolation has had the #1 negative impact on the lives of people living with disabilities relative to the COVID-19 pandemic. So in response and in collaboration with the Administration for Community Living, a grants program was developed and implemented to address social isolation during the pandemic with the goal of mitigating the physical, mental, and behavioral impacts and enhancing connectedness of people living with paralysis and their caregivers to their communities to also prevent adverse health outcomes. Now, the University of Kentucky Human Development Institute was one of 11 organizations awarded in our first cohort. And I congratulate them on the great work that they have undertaken with this grant. And I congratulate them on this series of workshops. I also want to invite all of you who are participating in these virtual workshops for people living with paralysis to learn more about all of the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation's Quality of Life grants programs by visiting www.christopherreeve.org. Thank you.
Good. And we'd like to thank Mark. He's been very good to work with over the last little bit. So, and one more thing too, I forgot the housekeeping. Live transcript is available. If you go down to the bottom of your screen and click the More button, you can enable the show subtitle or view full transcript if you need that service. So I think probably most of you all know our guests, speakers today, Dr. Kathy Shepard-Jones and Dr. Phil Rumrell, two important colleagues and as I said before, just really good people. So I welcome them and I'll let them jump in and introduce themselves. And before I do that, real quick, I'm sorry for support and Lindsay Mullis for being helping me put all this stuff together. So I appreciate both of you all as well. So go for it, y'all.
Well, thank you, Jason. It's great to be here. This is Phil Rumrell. Dr. Shepard-Jones, I wonder if you'd be willing to introduce yourself first.
Absolutely. I'm Kathy Shepard-Jones and really excited to be here with everybody this afternoon and to have an opportunity to connect with Phil Rumrell, and hopefully talk a little bit about careers, and what better time to be doing that than as we're coming out of this pandemic, right? So hopefully we can have some good conversation this afternoon and maybe learn a few things along the way. But I will be helping Phil advance the slides and ask a few questions, and just please feel free to throw out there any thoughts or comments along the way. I think that'll work for you, won't it, Phil?
That's perfect. Yes, happy to have people interject questions, comments. We will pose polling questions at intervals throughout our proceedings today. But if you have a question, particularly with the smallish group, and small in number, but large in spirit, and feel free to blurt those out, just unmute and ask questions as we go. But we will pause regularly. We want to really have this as an opportunity to dialogue with all of you and hear about your experience as you recharge resiliency. I think that's a great name for this program, and it's a great time for the time. It's I think very apt for the time of history we find ourselves in. So we are delighted to be with you. Thank you for that, Kathy, and looking forward to spending the next hour and a half or so together with you all. Could we go? I'm calling in by telephone. I look much better that way, so thanks for bearing with me. And Dr. Shepard-Jones will be advancing the slides, so we'll try to do this in seamless fashion. Kathy, we've done a few of these, I think, together, so we should have it down.
We got this.
Fair enough. So the title slide is beyond us now, and let's go to the slide that talks about our objectives. And we have just three. The first is to examine the opportunities that employment-related and career opportunities that await qualified and capable workers with disabilities as we look ahead to the post-COVID-19 era. It's only been recently that we've been optimistic about that concept, but we really think that we're turning the corner on the pandemic, and it's time to start thinking about what happens when COVID-19 is behind us. It's not behind us yet, but it is getting there. We also want to suggest a 9-step process that we've used in a number of training and direct service applications, projects we've had at HDI and other places to help people in starting or restarting their careers. It's kind of a career counseling, a set of career counseling modules that we want to share with you in brief fashion, but we think within those will be some things to consider as you think about either advancing in your careers or starting or restarting your careers at this particular time. And we see employment as really the ultimate antidote to the social isolation that COVID-19 has perpetrated against all of us. And so we think it's really appropriate at this time to be looking at how employment plays into that. Certainly the world of work has changed dramatically, but so has the world as a whole over the past 2 years or so. And how we look at things like social engagement and communication and participation in all aspects of society have changed, and we want to take those things into account, but we want to kind of frame that within the context of participation in employment as a means of staying healthy, staying happy, and really improving quality of life over the lifespan. That was a long-winded way to talk about our second objective. Our third objective is related to that, and this is to consider the meaning of work to all people and how that may have changed for you all individually or for people in general as a result of of the COVID-19 experience. We'll go to the next slide, Dr. Shepard-Jones.
We are there.
We are there, yes. Any questions or comments before we begin?
Hey, this is Brandon. Kathy, the slides are a little small in this view. Nailed it. Perfect.
Okay, well, if now that we've charged it, maybe you can see the title, why it's a great time to be thinking about starting or restarting your career. Just a few prefatory remarks here. First and foremost, we really see this time in history as a time where we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We really believe that COVID-19 is declining. Cases certainly are. Hospitalizations are declining. Deaths are declining. Thank goodness. 74% of all adults are vaccinated now. Vaccines are coming to children. So our schools, our workplaces, our communities are going to be safer than they have been for the last nearly 2 years now. And we are coming out of this. So this is not a statement about politics, folks. It's a statement in herd immunity. And we think we've got a pause for great optimism as we think about not only getting out into the community in all kinds of ways, but also thinking about engaging and re-engaging in employment. And speaking of engaging in employment, we know already that the reopening of society, which has already begun, and what we call the burgeoning full employment economy is already rolling. Just look when you go out into the community. Right now, folks, everybody's hiring, right? More jobs available than there are workers to take them. As more and more people become vaccinated and feel they can re-engage physically with the work environment, there's going to be opportunities there. Employers are needing good, qualified, and capable workers in ways that has really been unprecedented at any time in peacetime history. And so the whole reopening of our society really portends very well for this discussion of thinking about how do we move forward in thinking about our employment pursuits. And we think that you all are well poised to take advantage of this labor shortage that is occurring nationally. Let's speak a little bit about age as well, the changing age demographic of our society. This has nothing to do with COVID, but we know there are 73 million living Americans who were born between the years 1946 and 1964. That's the baby boom generation. And the baby boom generation has one unifying characteristic. They're not getting any younger. Everybody's getting older. We all are. But this large group of folks who are all born at a time of very high birth rates in our society are aging into retirement. And so combining that with life expectancies increasing as they have steadily over the past 3 decades, we're going to have more 65-year-olds, more 75-year-olds, more 85-year-olds, dare we say 95-year-olds in our society than we ever did at any other time in history. What that means, and this is a good thing. We want people to lead long and healthy and productive and active lives. But what that means is that there are, if you take a look at the overall population, as the population ages, we have proportionally and in sheer number fewer workers to support the economy. We have more retirees, we have fewer workers. This means employers, once again, are going to need workers who are of working age, and for people of nearing retirement age, they're going to have opportunities to extend their work lives and to put off retirement if they wish to, because there's going to be opportunities simply for the sheer plain economic fact that employers are going to need workers. And so the age demographic definitely plays into this as well. Work at home, telecommuting, flexible schedules, virtual communication, all of these things we had to do to pivot during COVID-19. And Kathy, I'm thinking of all the things within HDI we had to do in the middle of this pandemic, and how many, when the whole university was shut down to completely virtual engagement. Many folks now coming back, working in the office, working in hybrid kinds of configurations, working from remote, physical presence. We work at a university, so we look at students and classes, students choosing to access courses virtually, et cetera. So technology and communication technology, virtual engagement, this is here to stay. It's going to open opportunities. for people in all kinds of ways. Jobs are going to be open that didn't used to be. People who, because of mobility considerations or other concerns, perhaps had difficulty arranging transportation to work or didn't want to go to work physically in the workplace. Now opportunities are going to be available to them as well. So this is going to be an unintended, perhaps positive outcome of COVID, is that the way we do work and the way we engage with each other is going to be changed forever. And we think it's going to open and expand opportunities. And this really underscores the universal design emphasis of everything that we do at HDI. What's more universal in the design of the workplace when you can work wherever you are, whenever you can, and using technology that allows you to do your job. We think this is it's simply a beautiful thing, and it's going to get even more interesting as opportunities continue to emerge. And making these kinds of connections. Social isolation was a requirement really of COVID-19. It's going to go back to becoming a choice. We hope all of you will choose not to isolate and to get out and reconnect in all kinds of ways. And when we say get out, we mean virtually, we mean physically, we mean in person, we mean every way that term implies. And so employment as a conduit to social participation, and therefore as an antidote to social isolation, we see this as a really powerful and encouraging thing that's happening in our society. Going down the list, how about federal legislation such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, requiring that workplaces become even more inclusive. ADA has had specific provisions that they've added, even in the face of COVID-19. For example, long COVID syndrome or long hauler syndrome is now considered a presumptive disability under Title I of the ADA, that if you have long COVID, whether you have other co-occurring disabilities or not, you're considered a person with a disability under the law, therefore eligible for reasonable accommodations and other non-discriminatory protections that are available to you. So the law is on our side too, as we look forward to participating fully in this burgeoning full employment economy. With all of this, folks, we're already finding, Kathy, in projects that we're doing at HDI, that employers are more receptive to the notion of reasonable accommodation, to flexibility in the workplace, to virtual engagement in work, to this broadest idea of what it's like to engage in work, to the full measure of universal design in the workplace than they've ever been at any point in history that we can remember for sure. And so employers are poised, and maybe it's because they're more oriented towards social justice and inclusion. Maybe it's just because they need good workers. Maybe it's a combination of the two. I'm thinking it is, but this is another positive thing. So there's great reason for optimism for anyone who's wanting to, I love this word, recharge your career at this particular time. Dr. Shepard-Jones, I'm going to catch my breath for a moment. I'm sure you've got some things to say about this. Why, anything you'd like to add on why it's a great time to be having this conversation?
Well, you covered a lot of territory there, Phil, and really did so well. But I am very much struck by, what this has looked like at the University of Kentucky over the last, 18 months. We've really been in a situation where we have had to recognize that it really is about learning to work anywhere, to learn anywhere, to teach anywhere, and to connect from anywhere as well. And there are a lot of positives that go along with that. I think we've learned a lot of important lessons along the way, but I think that it does definitely set us up to recognize that perhaps at no other time in recent history have we been in a situation where more people are paying attention and listening and recognizing that, right now, in a sense, in workforce and employment, we can create where we want to go to a large measure, and that can only build workforce. That means a more inclusive workforce. That means a more responsive workforce. It means a more healthy workforce for the state and for the nation. So people are listening right now. And I think it lets us all maybe reflect a little bit about what does it mean to work, and what do you want work to mean for your life as well, and how does that fit within your whole world. And the only other thing I want to mention is, Phil, you talked a little bit about universal design and accessibility. And as we think about universal design, initially that was something that we talked about around, removal of barriers in the physical environment, right? So curb cuts, having entrances, programming that's accessible for everyone. But really what it means is also we have to think about environments in a virtual sense as well. So we've got the whole World Wide Web out there, and many of us are using that as that main conduit for our work, for our connections. So ensuring that those environments where people are going to come together, either for social connections or for employment, they need to be usable. They need to be accessible to the widest array of people possible in order for us to really take advantage of these opportunities that we have in front of us.
Hey, I wanted to add something too, Kathy, that you all talk a lot about the work from home model and that kind of stuff. And I was talking to a friend the other day, and they were saying that it's pretty amazing that this is really a good derivative of the pandemic, because we would have never done this experiment on our own, right? We would have not, as a country, let thousands of people go home and say, well, let's see how this works, right? And since we were forced into it, we found that production is better in a lot of situations, and that we can get a lot more done, and we can still maintain a very healthy work environment too, and not necessarily have to be in the room together all the time. And there's advantages to both. So I thought that was pretty interesting. It was a forced experiment, and we were all the control group and the other group as well.
All in one. That's a great point, Jason. I'm glad you brought it up, and thanks, Kathy. I think I just saw just this morning, actually, on CNBC. I was listening, and they were saying that the estimates currently are that 50% of all workers who worked on site in person prior to the pandemic will be working at home or virtually for at least some portion of the work week after the pandemic is over. Okay, so of these folks, 100% of them were working in person prior, and half of them are going to be working at home at least some of the time. That's the current metric, and that could change, but that's what they're anticipating. And think of the impact of that on just the organizational culture, how the workplace operates, socialization. It's all going to change, and businesses and how they deal with things like operating expenses and light bills and heating and fuel costs and all of that, and facility and space and what office space costs. And people, businesses, everybody, they're already doing it, of course, during the pandemic, but re-looking at expenses related to establishing the workplace. And I love that part about universal design of the of the environment and of technology, and perhaps even more broadly, I don't mean to sound too Twilight Zone, but really of the atmosphere, itself. And it isn't just about physical in-person accessibility anymore. Much of the action in the new development is going to be on how communication technology is universally designed, and those universal design features are being built in to devices much more quickly than they used to be. They used to first build the product and then figure out how to retrofit it, right, Kathy, with universal design features. Now it's happening all at the same time. And so that's very encouraging. And it's going to be all of these things we believe are going to open opportunities for people rather than the other way around. So very, very encouraging. Love to hear now if any of what we've shared so far resonates with your own experiences. We'll take just a moment as we go to the next slide. Anybody, anything?
Nothing in the chat right now.
Well, Kathy, we do have a fistful of icebreakers, don't we? So we're gonna lay some things on you all very, very soon. So bear with us. So let's structure the rest of our time together around these 9 steps of the starting or restarting or continuing your career. 9 steps of career counseling. This is a process that was developed by our HDI colleagues, Amy Rummerl and Kimberly Wickert. And this has been used in a number of applications, including several of the projects we have ongoing right now at HDI. And I really think it does provide a very good kind of A to Z orientation of how people think about either getting started in their careers, restarting their careers, or continuing your careers. So folks, you may be at different steps in this process. That's okay. These are meant to be somewhat sequential, but not necessarily linear. People will go in and out of one or the other. Sometimes people recycle back through the steps. That is perfectly fine. And you can kind of, and let's say you're recharging your career and starting over, looking for a new job, you might start at step 3 or 4 or 5, but in the pure form, they do really cut across, we think, all the considerations that people will be making in terms of taking advantage of this incredible employment opportunity that awaits us as we continue a reopening of our society. Dr. Shepard-Jones, I wonder, you've got the slides there in front of you. Would you mind reading these just for the benefit of everybody, reading them as we presented them, and then we'll break them down one by one. Sound good?
Certainly. So to review the 9 steps that we're going to be talking about. Step 1, determine your dream job based on your skills, values, and interests. Step 2, ask who is doing your dream job. Step 3, establish a career portfolio. Step 4, do your homework. Step 5, ask around about jobs and employers. Step 6, complete applications for all viable job possibilities. Step 7, let's talk interviews. Step 8, let's talk disclosure, and that's disclosure of disability. And step 9, starting your new job or recharging your current job.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you. So those are the 9 steps, and let's just go ahead. And again, under step 1, Kathy, I know we've got at least one question we want to throw out there, and every question we do ask, we'll wait till there's at least one response before we move forward. We're both counselors, so we don't mind a little silence in between, do we?
We're very comfortable with pauses and silence, but I think a fun question to get us started as we're talking about step 1, which is determining your dream job based on your skills, values, and interests, is, so if you could get paid a full-time salary for doing what you love to do most, what would that dream job consist of? What would it be? So you can either unmute and just share, or you can put something in the chat, but we really do want to hear from everybody. What's your dream job?
How about cheese taster? Or pretty much anything good taster, dessert taster, ice cream taster, cake taster.
Did you say cheese taster?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be fun? And don't the cheese tasters and like wine tasters, they actually, or Kathy and I are both from Vermont. Kathy, the quality control people at Ben and Jerry's, right? Don't they just literally taste the ice cream and then spit it out to see that it's okay? They literally can't eat ice cream all day.
They have a spoon in their pocket from the start to the end of the day.
Yeah. Wow. What a deal.
Ooh, and we've got
right after lunch, Jason lays that on us. Who else? That's great, Jason.
We've got some in the chat, watching classic movies, basketball play-by-play guy. We don't have to talk about last night's basketball game with UK though, right? And be a songwriter from Ash.
Oh, excellent, excellent. And at this stage in the process, this is one of what we call in cognitive psychology a divergent thinking task, right? This is generating all possible options. We don't want people to limit themselves at this particular time. It's thinking about, a friend of ours, Mark Savickas, talks about work and love, and he very much, it's the same thing. It's finding something you do that you truly love to do and finding a way to get paid for it. That's the ultimate measure of a dream job. And so some of the things that we think about here is what are the qualities and assets and virtues and strengths and even passions. I hope that doesn't sound corny, but it's true that you're marshaling and thinking about your dream job. And it's those positive qualities that really propel people forward into success. We're not talking here about limitations, challenges, difficulties, not at this particular point. Many of those can be accommodated, and frankly, talking about things like that is really just kind of boring when there's so many exciting opportunities to be had. So the measure of your success is going to be in your ability to marshal all of those strengths and assets that you bring to the table, and letting employers know that and bringing them to bear, doing the things that you love to do. Along with that, what would be your long-term employment or career goal? That overused question, where do you want to be in 5 years, in 10 years? And is the job you have now a step, in that direction? Very, very important there as you think about that dream job, and no need to limit yourself at this particular time, because we're really wanting to expand whatever our options might be. There's a couple of resources we would commend to your attention in determining if after you've determined some possibilities and you know what some of your interests and personality characteristics might be, 2 ways of helping to articulate your stated personality choices into specific careers. One is the ONET Interest Profiler. This is a free service of the United States Department of Labor. You can go in, you can answer some questions about yourself, and it tells you the occupations of people who share your interest profile. So it doesn't say, would you enjoy being a cheese taster? It asks you questions about yourself, your background, your history. And that becomes very important in the whole scheme of things too, not just what kind of paid work you've had, but volunteer experiences, hobbies, recreational activities, sports and leisure. What kinds of things do you get excited about? And then it creates a profile and suggests occupations where you share characteristics with people in those occupations. Very similar process is the self-directed search, been in use for many, many years. I think it costs $4.95. You go online, you get an online version of this, and it does essentially the same thing and identifies these occupations for you to consider. And then those can drive the very next stages, steps 2 through 9, as you go forward to kind of crystallize your career choices. Here we want to emphasize, if you have a state vocational rehabilitation counselor or a VA counselor or other providers you may be working with to assist in your employment pursuits, loop them into this process as well. They can help in that process, even if you're not fully decided about what you might want to do, can help you to, based on what interests and passions you have, helping to articulate to that to a few career goals that you can consider as you kind of move forward. Very good, thank you. Let's go on to the second one, and this one is kind of interesting, we think, and this is who is doing your dream job. We think it's really important to, if you've got a dream job so you want to be a cheese taster, get to know a cheese taster, find out what it's like. Is it really all what it's cracked up to be? Is the first hour each day pretty good, but after about 3:30 p.m. you've been tasting cheese for 7 hours, and then you come home and what are we having for dinner? We're having grilled cheese sandwiches. That might not be quite as interesting. And so finding out what that's really like, talking to people who do that job and getting to know that person. We talk about the importance of informational interviews, contacting people who do it, asking them 3 to 5 questions about what do they like most about the job, what kind of training did they receive, what advice would they give for someone wanting to enter that occupation, whatever it might be, job shadowing. This is literally, and could be virtual, following someone for a day, going with them, seeing what kinds of meetings and tasks they're performing in whatever it is that they do. You can do this virtually as well. Networking really here is a premium, and it really does become about who you know and making those contacts and not leaving any stone unturned in those kinds of connections. We see the vast importance of mentoring, and especially peer mentoring, people who have characteristics in common with you. And our own Jason Jones is our resident expert on this subject for sure. I'm going to pick on you in a moment, Jason, and ask you if anything to add here. But we're increasingly finding that the mentors, whether they're peer mentors, professional mentors, or some combination thereof, they don't need to be local. You don't have to meet them at the coffee shop, although you can. You can engage. Engage virtually as well, and all connections that you can generate move us forward in coming out from under this really lousy social isolation that we all experienced during COVID-19. So making these connections has the added benefit of re-engagement. And I know many of you are already doing this as we're moving forward, but in doing it in a formal way as you're moving forward in your own career pursuits and thinking about what's next, we see this as a really important element of that is thinking about these connections as a way to engage with other people, and everyone you engage with is a possible resource for you to find that dream job. Jason, talk to us a little bit about peer mentoring and your own work and experience in this regard, and just free associate with us about this mentoring in general, please.
Well, I mean, I'm a deep believer in peer mentoring, and mostly because my experiences over the years have been significantly beneficial to not only my career, but just personally as well. And so I've always sort of felt like that given the opportunity to give back to that situation is a good opportunity to grow, not only professionally, but just as a human being. And I have found over the years that, the person that really knows what they're talking about, and I've told this story 1,000 times, but I came across my mentor in rehab after my accident. And, I have great parents that were so supportive, but they could not answer the kind of questions I needed to ask a guy who'd been in a wheelchair for many years, had dealt with paralysis, had dealt with all the, secondary conditions that are possible, those kinds of things. That's why the mentoring aspect is so important. And if you translate to a job, and you have somebody who's willing to be a mentor that can say, avoid this pitfall, don't do that, pay attention to your paperwork, whatever those things are, you can significantly, first of all, increase your quality of life, because, if things aren't good at work, things probably aren't going to be good very many other places as well. It can really drag you down. And I hope no one is in that situation. But it is, you can go about it the scientific route and see the research, because the research is there. And from my own personal experience as being a mentor and a mentee, there's no substitute for it. It really isn't.
Really appreciate that. Thank you, Jason. Thing that occurs to me here in thinking about mentors is many times the mentoring relationship is prospective, meaning we identify a person, we get to know that person, they say, I'd like to mentor you, or you say, would you be my mentor, that kind of thing, and we kind of move forward. Sometimes mentoring happens accidentally, or at least informally, and sometimes we don't even realize that people were mentors of ours until after the fact, until years later. Your 8th grade language arts teacher, who didn't seem to like you very much when you were in school, but as you look back on it years later, you realize that he or she, in this case, he really had your best interest, and it was trying to challenge you in ways that you didn't appreciate at the time. That's a hypothetical example, of course. I don't relate to that personally. Maybe I do, but it's sometimes after the fact that these kind of things happen. And Kathy, I'm thinking we have a question having to do with early career role models that might be germane here. Do you see that one?
I do, and I'm thinking that maybe we expand that as well, because it also, we can ask about who you considered some of your first role models around your job, but also who do you consider your mentors? And that could be now.
Yes. Either or both. I'd love it. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, Phil, you touched on a point a minute ago that is also really important when you said the informal, sometimes the informal ways of developing a relationship with someone who can ultimately help you. Those, I would argue, in a lot of situations are more important. Because you are involved because you want to be, and that person is involved because they want to be, more than, there being a program available at IBM or another big company where they match people together. Those can be very strong relationships.
Appreciate that.
And I think the fact that the world in some ways does seem like a smaller place now as well, and removing some of the issues around, locality and being able to, like Phil said, not necessarily be at a coffee shop. But, I've reached out to people who are living in different parts of the world and who I've started communicating with, whom I might not have before COVID, honestly, but now who I feel very comfortable making connections with. And so I think that shows as well that those mentors really can come from literally anywhere around the world at this point. And that's kind of exciting, really.
It is. And, I think we do it because we can, but also because we have to, what happened during COVID-19 just was so unnatural for everyone. And that kind of pent up demand for connection. If that's the only way you can engage with people, you may broaden out the radius, right? And it may continue to broaden out as time goes on. So I think this is it's going to be an unintended positive consequence of this really lousy thing we've been dealing with. That's a great example. Thank you.
And it
Folks,
does.
anything?
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Nope.
No, I was just going to say, and it really does apply at any point along one's work life, right? So it's not necessarily if you're just getting started, because people are staying in the workforce longer, people are changing careers. Lots of things are happening that mean mentoring can really make a difference in success for that.
Absolutely. Folks, anything you'd share with us about role models looking back and mentors looking in the present tense?
Phil, Lori Norton says, I've had great mentors who taught me so much such. Am I reading that right? I'm sorry, Lori. As one person at a time when I was worried about all, teaching me how to think things through. For example, when I would go to my mentor / supervisor / friend, she would ask me what I thought. I wouldn't be where I am today without her and others who believed in me and mentored me, sorry.
Thank you, Lori. It's just incredibly powerful, point about how profoundly we're affected by people who guide us, right?
Absolutely.
And one thing that I found is that you never really know, when somebody tells you something or somebody gives you a little assistance, how much that will mean not only to you but to that person. If it's somebody you're mentoring, you never know, that one little thing that maybe gets that person going in the right direction. And I always think it's sort of like a waterfall. You get enough water and it finally falls over the edge. And maybe the person's been told that 10 times and you're the 11th person, and it goes over, it goes over the top, and then they start moving forward. So yeah, it's huge.
That's a great point. You never know when that influence is going to hit someone. It may not be all that what you're sharing with someone may not be all that insightful to you. You might have said it 100 times yourself, but for the person who registers with it and resonates to it, it can have a great impact. And you never know when that's gonna, when that's gonna come. So the opportunity also, I hear in your point, to give back also, right, and to help other people along the way as you can. What's more gratifying than that, right? Talk about connection. Great point. Thank you. Dr. Shepherd-Jones, or should we go to the next slide?
We can do that. That would be step 3, establish a career portfolio.
And here we're starting to get into the kind of nuts and bolts of that crystallization process that goes on. And again, we think these are worth thinking about, even if you're successfully and happily employed. It can be about moving forward into your next career step. It could be about advancing on the job you have, doing that more effectively or in more satisfying ways, or in finding other employment for sure. Resume kind of goes without saying, but making sure you have a professional and up-to-date resume. On the slide after this is a screenshot of Resume Genius. There's many other programs you can use. If you're working again with the state vocational rehabilitation program or any other agency, they can often help with resume preparation, but having a good current resume is a very, very important part of that. Along with that, we suggest samples of work products that you've had from other employment, from training that you've had. This could be projects you've worked on. If you're an architect, maybe you've got screenshots of plans and designs. If you're in some other kind of product design kind of field, listings of the products you've been involved with, whatever that might be, whatever your work was, photographs, videos of things that you did that were interesting, innovative, unique, written products like papers, materials, brochures, things from courses, presentations that you may have made, formal or informal ones, but developing, and usually now it's an electronic repository of these samples that you can bring out. You're going to be an advantage at the interview or in whatever consideration for a future employment over a person who doesn't have these. And so opportunities to put your best foot forward become really important, and cataloging that in an accessible format, so you don't have to track them down every time you have a need to refer to them. Speaking of the Latin root refer, in terms of references, developing a list of references, people who know you well. These can be past or current past employers. It can be current co-workers, supervisors, etc. Can be instructors, professors, mentors, family friends, neighbors, whoever these folks might be. Both can be references of personal and of your personal as well as your professional standing and character. It's really important to emphasize here that the references all know that they're your references and for what particular purpose. Let them know you're going to put them down. Ask them if that's okay. I also encourage people to take the added step of saying, I'd like to include you as a reference for this job. Would you be able to recommend me positively for this position? And it sounds like that's maybe kind of unnecessary to do, but it is worth knowing. And when you ask someone like that in that straightforward a fashion, what you really don't want is a reference to get checked and have the person say, no, this person isn't very good, or I wouldn't recommend him or her. I like to find out before the fact what the answer would be before I put the person down. So it's partly a courtesy, but it's partly also strategizing or hedging your own bets to make sure that you're putting down the people who would provide the most compelling, reference for you. And I find that people tend to be pretty honest about this. And sometimes when you ask for a reference and they can't recommend you, they might tell you why, and it might be instructive or constructive feedback, for future planning and for future, to use an overused word, reference. So references are important. Keep a list. Keep up to date with these folks. If these are people you're going to use as part of your career portfolio, I also suggest keeping in touch with people who will be references at least once a year, so you don't have to reintroduce yourself to them down the road. Also, just a great way to maintain social capital and to continue those relationships that you work so hard to establish. Very, very important piece there. Related to that, the next bullet related to employment contacts of all kind. You don't leave any stone unturned. I was about to say you don't leave any turn unstoned, but I don't know what that exactly means. So making sure you've got all the possible contacts, make a list of all potential employer contacts for employment, including employers, but people who would know about the job market as well. If you're looking for work, let people know you are. If you're looking for advancement opportunities, let people know. You just never know where those job leads are going to come from. Somewhat relatedly, establishing social media accounts, making sure they are professional in nature, or you're at least not posting things that potential employers would find objectionable. They can access your social media accounts, particularly the public access pages of those, and just make sure as you post things on social media, you would want a prospective employer to see you doing whatever it is you're posting, or to see you articulating whatever that point of view might be. I had a guidance counselor in high school, Kathy, who told me you should never write anything down on paper that you wouldn't want your mother to see. And I can't recall what the impetus was for that advice, but it must have been something I had written down that he saw. And I think this advice is germane as it applies to social media. So Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn too, a professional networking site, great place to register, but monitoring your own content and putting your best foot forward there. The same with email accounts. You know, if you, no one here of course would do this, but if you're sending resumes to an employer and your email address is, you know, partyanimal83@yahoo.com, that may not be the best way to come across to an employer from the very beginning. So we suggest an innocuous email that has your name in it, so people can track it in that way, and communicating professionally through email and informal correspondence with an employer, even though it's through email. Make sure you're using formal prose, complete sentences, probably not too many of the emojis and thumbs up and smiley faces and those kinds of things. And I say this sort of tongue in cheek, but it happens all the time because technology has changed the way we communicate with one another, but it hasn't changed all employers' expectations in terms of the way that, that people engage when they're looking for work. Gather or purchase, interview appropriate attire, and we'll have a little more on that as we proceed through the steps. Kathy, Jason, or anybody, anything you'd want to add on that whole idea of social media and email presence? You know, for people who are younger than I am, this stuff comes a lot more naturally, but I tend to be kind of conservative when it comes to these sorts of things, and I'm not all that technologically savvy. So in emails and things like that, I suggest people make it look more like an actual kind of, business letter, and just being careful about what you're communicating out there, because sometimes you can never get that imagery back. But I'll pause and see if there's any thoughts about that.
Bill, I think it would be really good if we could set you up a TikTok page where you could go through different dances or stuff. That'll be entertaining.
It's 45 seconds at a time, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yes, I do a fairly good Chris Farley imitation. That well, we won't get into. Let's just. Thanks for that point, Kathy.
Well, I think that's well said, and I know we're coming up onto taking a break, and I'm going to go deactivate my partyanimal.com email address. Do we need 5 minutes, Jason? How long?
Yeah, we'll come back at about 2:02. That works. It's 1:57 now, so about 5 minutes.
I didn't realize that was you, but we are taking your application under full consideration.
I understand.
All right, we'll see everybody back in about 5 minutes. I think we're back. If everybody wants to start jumping back on, hope everybody grabbed themselves a nice big piece of cheese and something to drink. I'm just kidding. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Rumrell and Dr. Shepard-Jones, and we will finish, Phil, as close to
Jason, you broke up there for a moment. You said 2:30, right?
Yes, for some reason, Zoom just, can y'all hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, Zoom just restarted weirdly right in the middle of my conversation. Yes, we're trying to get together as close to 2:30 as we can. Kathy, are
We
you
will
there?
stop recording.
Do what?
Go ahead, Jason. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, are you meaning to show Resume Genius?
No, we weren't going to show it, just referring to it. That was just the next slide, just an example.
Okay, all right,
Thank
then, yes,
No,
we'll try to finish as close to 2:30 as we can, Phil.
We absolutely will. Thanks for coming back, folks, after the break. Appreciate that. This is far too much fun to consider it work. It's a great pleasure to be with you today, and we want to get through now. Only 6 steps left and 11 minutes or so to get there. No, a few more than that, but we'll click these off a little more quickly, and we'll leave you to the rest of your afternoon. We all work at universities, so we can't have a stage model of any kind that doesn't include homework in it. So step 4, Dr. Shepard-Jones, the next slide is do your homework. Finding that dream job becomes a priority. If you're looking for work, then looking for work is a full-time job in and of itself. We think arming yourself with information about the local labor market in wherever your geographic radius for your job search is very important. We'll recommend the ONET website for labor market information, local, state, national, what kinds of jobs are in the most demand, what they pay, what the requirements are, etc. You can do a lot of your own occupational information searching right online. Determining a geographic radius for your job search or for your career change. No point in looking outside that area, outside where you would be willing to live. But the issue of where you might live has changed, hasn't it, during COVID? And that may be for the kind of work you're looking for. It may not be required that you live near the job with virtual and work at home kinds of options. So that geographic radius can be a different kind of configuration than it was just a couple of years ago. Online job search sites, all employers are posting information here. So you visit Monster and Career Builder and Indeed, and you'll see so many jobs in your local community. And making sure that you access those online sites as a conduit for the kind of information that you're looking for. Professional search firms and headhunters are really salivating right now at the opportunity to place good, qualified, and capable people in professional level jobs. Labor unions, trade unions, professional organizations in your chosen field. Job fairs, we would underscore this point for sure, because many job fairs that are virtual, some are in person. Employers hiring people in large numbers just on the spot at that particular time. So if you go to a job fair with a good resume and everything in order, be prepared to consider offers in real time. So job fair is a very efficient way to do recruitment, and that's very important at a time of labor shortage. Once again, if you're working with the state voc rehab counselors or VA counselor or anyone else, loop them into this process about identifying that dream job and how you go about getting it and arming yourself with all that information. The next step on the next slide is more homework, really. It's asking around about jobs and employers, investigating what you hear. Talk with people who work for the company or organization you are considering. Talk with people who used to work there and don't anymore is another good way to do that. You'll see online employee reviews. You can look at a company or an organization, and online they post, usually anonymous people post evaluations of what it's like to work at that place. We think these are very important. The Better Business Bureau as a way of identifying what's the business reputation of the employer that you're considering. You can see if they've had complaints, and if so, what kind, and how those may have been resolved in case that factors into your decision making. Some employers are better known for others in terms of their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is a consideration that is certainly worth taking into account, particularly if you feel you would require accommodations for the job you are seeking or the job you're wishing to advance in, to understand that and examine what their workplace inclusion policies and Dr. Shepard-Jones could talk for a long time about that entire notion in workplace inclusion, a concept that we're advancing in a number of initiatives at HDI. Relatedly, the COVID-19 policy of the employers. Do they require vaccinations? Are they in person? Masks? What's the air quality assurances, et cetera? Environmental considerations. What kinds of provisions are put in place as we move forward? And is the vaccination policy of the employer, is that important to you and something that you would need to consider? Relatedly, and probably at no other time in our history has this been more important, taking into account, are the politics of your employer important to you? What they stand for on particular issues that are important to you, perhaps related to things like social justice, diversity, equity, inclusion, or any other thing for that matter. It's just such a politicized time in our history, and we usually know the leanings of employers and organizations. And if that's an important consideration for you as well, it's one we would suggest you investigate. Again, all part of that broader notion of doing homework. Dr. Shepard-Jones, anything to add on the ask around step?
No, I really appreciate the bullets here around policies and politics. And just thinking for myself, you know, as far as politics go, when I was just starting in my career, that's probably not something that would have been on my mind a whole lot. It was really much more about, I really need a job. But now I think that that's extremely important to me. So it's interesting to see, you know, how some things, while lots of things stay the same, some things really are changing in really important ways that help us make sure that we're living our values as well, which is also, I think, something that is helpful in this conversation as we're thinking about how we do want to connect with each other in the world of work.
No doubt, and I think it's an interesting luxury in some ways that we have available to us during this time of national labor shortage. The applicant, the job seeker, the employee gets to make these kinds of considerations. How come? Because they have other choices, you know, and you can make those options. And it's also developmental, is it? At different times in our lives, certain things are more important to us than others. And I really appreciate you underscoring that point. Thank you. Let's go on to the next slide. This has to do with applying for those jobs that you see that meet your goals and interests, and what aspects of the application process do we need to think about. We really feel like when in doubt, if you're not sure if you should apply, then you should apply. Get your name out there. Submit. Get these options. Let yourself have the choice, and let the employer have the option of considering you, and you choose from the widest range of opportunities. Don't limit yourself at the point of application. See what's out there. Apply when you can. You'll automate in many ways and mechanize the process of making these applications. They're online. Get your resume out there. Even if you go through a process and it doesn't work out, sometimes you identify another lead from that. Sometimes you have a good interview that leads to another lead, et cetera. Following up on the application. We don't want to bother employers sometimes. You probably won't have too much trouble with persistence, because if you're a good candidate, the employer is going to reach out to you right away and try to scoop you up. But it never hurts to follow up and let them know. It also can count in your favor. It's an indication, I think, of initiative that you're willing to follow up. So keep that in mind. Keywords that are on job postings, you want to use these on your resume, on your cover letter, during the interview, et cetera. Whatever they're saying about what's most important, give those back to the employer. It shows you're being thoughtful and deliberate about the kinds of expectations they have, and it shows you as being a much better match for that position than somebody who doesn't lock on to those keywords. Keep a mock application file, usually electronic, of all the information about yourself that you can load into applications, so you don't have to find out all those things about your prior work history and other contacts and things like that. You have it all in one, so you can make 5, 6, 7 applications all at once if you want to, but keeping that information in some sort of electronic repository, I think is very, very important. Do you need technology or accommodations to complete those applications? Becomes, I think, another very important consideration that you want to make as you think about how to submit applications. Use of technology, are the online procedures, are they accessible to you, etc. Very, very important. We think computer file also to store confirmations of applications that you've already completed, so you know which ones you've sent in. Again, if we take this shotgun approach and apply to everything that looks interesting, then we go through and we want to make sure we've kept track of those places we have applied to, when we did it, when did we follow up. I think a spreadsheet really works well in this regard as well. So that's about applications. We'll go on to the next slide. Step 7, having to do with interviews. And in this one, we want to begin by saying that you want to emphasize, when you go to the interview, you're emphasizing your very most positive skills, assets, virtues, kind of like what we talked about before. Your only obligation in the interview is to put your best foot forward. This is a persuasive essay on your own behalf to let them know everything that would make you a good worker. And in that regard, we think that humility and modesty are best applied only in moderation during an interview. They bring with it some charm. We like people who are humble and modest for sure. But you know, that's endearing in some ways. It doesn't really get you the job, because if you're understating or you're self-deprecating or self-effacing in some way, do that after you're on the job, after you've been there for a while, not during the interview. We want you to, and it's not bragging if you did it and focusing on positives. You want the employer to see only your most positive qualifications, and that's your only job in terms of how the in terms of how the interview proceeds. There's almost invariably a question during interviews that has to do the old trick question. They ask you about your weaknesses, and they really do want you to answer this question, but we think it's important to seek ways that turn the answer about your weakness. You can acknowledge a weakness, but sometimes it's a weakness that the employer might interpret as a positive quality. A couple of examples we give in response to this. What is a weakness? We think a good answer is, sometimes I'm too hard on myself, sometimes I'm too critical of my own work. When somebody tells you that, on one hand, we don't want someone who's always beating themselves up, but Kathy, as an employer of 300 people, when someone tells you they're their own worst critic, or they're sometimes too critical of themselves, what are they suggesting to you that might make you think positively of them?
Well, they're suggesting that they are that they definitely are a hard worker, that they are taking the big picture into account as well, and probably they're weighing lots of things into that decision, right? So when I'm hearing that, I'm thinking that they've got some experiences there that they're drawing from, and potentially someone that is going to really bring a lot to whatever it is that they're doing. And we might have to actually be thinking about, well, how do we make that realistic and reasonable in terms of accomplishing whatever that job task is, instead of being too overwhelming.
Yes, and I didn't tell Kathy I was going to call on her for that, so she had that in mind already. This is exactly, and this person is thoughtful, right? This person is reflective, and I'd rather have someone working with me who's too hard on themselves than not hard enough, right? And so those high expectations that we hold for ourselves, let them know that. That's a good way to answer that question, we would suggest. The other is, you answer it with something like, sometimes I find it difficult to decline opportunities for learning and growth, even when I'm already very busy. And the old adage, if you want something done, give it to the busy person, right? So you want someone who is industrious. You want someone who takes initiative. You want someone who's excited, who's enthusiastic. And we know that the people who pile on things like that, right? Sometimes that comes at a cost to them. Sometimes it's stressful, but those are the most productive people in your organization. The one who always find a way to get to yes rather than no, and the ones who are signing up for things and taking on those kinds of responsibilities. That's who employers are looking for. So you can say, so the weakness is sometimes I find it difficult not to take advantage of these things. It really comes across, as a positive. So dealing with that particular question, we think it requires some practice and some forethought. Practice interviewing, commonly asked interview questions. You can get these on any number of websites. Practice with a friend, a colleague, a mentor, for sure. Do you need accommodations during the interview? This becomes very important as well. If you do need it, make sure you've got them so that you're putting your very best foot forward during the entire process. They will often ask, do you have any questions for us at this time? The wrong answer is no. You always want to have a question. Ask about timeline. Ask about, when the decisions will be made. But more importantly, ask specific questions about the nature of the work, the nature of the company, and reference the homework you've done. You say, well, I've checked online and I noticed you mentioned this, this, and this, and I was wondering a little more. Could you tell me more about X, Y, or Z? That shows you did your homework. It shows you're prepared. It shows you're interested in the employer organization, and they really resonate well with that. So it isn't just out of their curiosity that they ask the question about, do you have any questions? It literally is an interview question, and your answer to that, or the question you do pose, becomes a part of the story of your interview. So asking good and insightful questions during that time, we think is very, very important. I want to say a word about attire in the modern labor market. Most job placement people and employers tell us that, the three-piece suit for gentlemen and the dark business suit for ladies isn't really, it doesn't have to be for every kind of job that you're applying for. You want to consider what the industry standards are in terms of expectations for the interview. More commonly, the etiquette is that you address for the interview in the manner that you would dress for that particular job. So if you find that the dress code is business casual, it's okay to dress in that way. We think maybe dress one level up, more formal than the actual job will require, but not two levels. You don't wear a tuxedo to a job where you'd be working on an assembly line where the dress would be very casual and comfortable. But it's always best to inquire. You can Google this. You can talk to people who are in that kind of work. Talk to people who are in the organization. What is it we should wear? You just don't want to, miss on that necessarily. But those rules have relaxed considerably over the past, say, 20 or 30 years. And then the follow-up after the fact. Dear Madam or Sir, I enjoyed the opportunity to meet with you. Even if you didn't enjoy the opportunity, even if the interview didn't really go that well, you never know when there might be another connection. Maybe you bump into that person through another employer. Maybe that's another contact down the road. Maybe you want to go back to that employer organization for another position at another time. So no matter how the interview goes, we want to be very careful to express, gratitude for the opportunity. Let them know how interested you are. Again, this is about giving you the choice to decide whether you want to do it or not, and wait until the process has been resolved from that point forward. So if the interview goes well, you always want to follow up. If the interview doesn't go well, you follow up, we think, exactly in the same fashion. It's a matter of etiquette, professionalism, and never burning any bridges. Kathy, we do have time for a question related to interview. There was a couple there that I thought we might throw in. What do you think?
Yes, let's do that. And I think we can give people a choice, either, because you've talked a lot about, different interview questions. I'm curious about either your best interview question that or what do you think is the worst thing that you can do in an interview? Maybe that's something that you've done. Maybe that's something that you've heard about. I'll share one with you to get started.
Is it something you did or you heard about?
No, this is actually a family member who is in a flight business, and right at the height of shutdown, when he was going in for an interview for a new position in Florida, and he went in and he's wearing his suit and his tie, and they literally met him at the front door and said, "We can't do this interview face to face. You need to go home. We'll send you a link to do this by Zoom." And he'd not used Zoom before, like many people hadn't at that point. And he didn't realize that there was a video component to Zoom. When he logged in, after he got home, he decided he was going to make himself comfortable, and he took off his tie and he took off his shirt. And so he started his job interview without wearing a shirt for this position with an airline. So that interview ended pretty quickly, but that would be an example of a really not so good thing to do during an interview.
Now, just to be clear, and this including during presentations, you don't have to wear a shirt if you're doing it over the phone, do you?
I got to leave that up to Jason.
Jason, what's the rule on that? Our boss is speechless.
Well, I would say technically you don't have to wear anything if you're on the phone. But again, I'm not in charge.
Fair enough. Yes, you've descended the conversation exactly to the very bottom, Jason. Thank you very much. Oh, that's a terrible example. Oh my word. All right, moving right along, and this may, how about we talk a little bit about disclosure in step 8, and perhaps Kathy, your family member, we should have talked about disclosure. Well, we won't even. Let's not even go there. Let's talk about disclosure. What does the law say? What is your obligation around disclosure of disability status to an employer? Technically, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, you only have to disclose your disability status. You're only required to if you plan to request a reasonable accommodation to do the job, okay? If you don't need an accommodation, you don't need to say anything about your disability status. And that's, I think, fairly well understood, but we want to underscore that particular point. But there are differences in disclosure that have to do with whether your condition is apparent to others or not. Because if people can visibly determine that you have a disability, perhaps you use a wheelchair, perhaps you are blind and use a cane or a service animal, for example, and they would detect this. That disclosure is already made for you. And so whether you want to add more to that information or not really becomes your own personal choice. The bottom line here is your own choice about how to make that kind of disclosure. And we want people to talk about disability ideally. First of all, you can tell them anything you want. We suggest you're protecting your own right to privacy if you talk about your disability status in functional terms. What things your disability makes it difficult for you to do, but just as importantly, what things it doesn't make it difficult for you to do, how you accommodate it, what accommodations you've used. And so whenever we talk about disability and make that disclosure, we always suggest talking about accommodation strategies that will allow you to perform the job, not regardless of the disability, but in light of the fact that you have a different way of doing the job. And so understanding whether you need to, and if your disability is not apparent to others, then there might be more explanation that is required about how it affects you and how it doesn't. If it is apparent to others, some of that may be taken care of, and you may, use your judgment about how that works. The other thing that we've noted, through the COVID-19 pandemic is because of virtual engagement, one's disability status may have been apparent if you went into a personal in-person interview, but it's not apparent if you're on Zoom or if you're calling in over the telephone, for example. So when you're doing things in person, you might not have had to disclose because people would already know or be able to determine that that you have a disability. Now they may not be aware of it, and if you have a need for an accommodation or any consideration related to disability, you may need to make a disclosure as if your condition was not apparent to others. I'm not saying this in a very good way, Kathy, but this distinction we hear about a lot, and we've talked with a lot of people, and I'm wondering if you could say it more coherently than I could. What is it what would you like people to know about that very, like on Zoom, it just changes virtual engagement may change the disclosure, metrics.
It certainly does, and that is another way I think that this COVID environment has changed that whole dynamic around disclosure, purely for that reason. And I think it's a matter of determining, by the job it is that you're applying for and that you're interviewing for, if it's germane. But it certainly does put the ownership of that choice back on the applicant or the person that has a disability in some instances, which is really, I think, a great example of how that social model of disability really comes into play when we're talking about employment and accommodations and impact of accessibility from the front end using universal design. I don't know if I said that any better.
That's much better. Thank you. And Jason is instrumentally involved with the Americans with Disabilities Act national network, right, Jason? And I know there's a lot of guidance around disclosure and tips and strategies that could contact the ADA Centers National Network. Also, the Job Accommodation Network does provide some good guidance in making this, highly personal decision. So we would commend those to your attention as well. And keeping my eye on the time, we're going to go to step 9, next step. And this is about securing the job, whether that's the one you're wanting to keep or advance in, or whether that's a new job altogether. And these folks are just a set of considerations that you make in that process. When you get the offer, how do we work on, is there negotiation that needs to happen? Questions you need to ask when a job is offered: what is the pay? What are the benefits? What is the start date? It's okay to ask those questions at the point of offer. We suggest keeping most of those questions for the offer, post-offer kind of consideration. Do you need, again, accommodations or technology of any kind to get started? It's always better to ask going into the job than it is after you've been on the job for a period of time. Sometimes the issue of disclosure here may come up if it didn't during the interview, and certainly no requirement that you disclose during the interview. You can also ask at the point of offer. Is there a medical examination required? And understanding that the evaluation has to be job specific, and you have the right for your medical and psychological capacities to be assessed only in terms of your ability to do, to do that particular job. Then, as we move forward in that process, thinking about what the very next steps might be. What do you need in the way of onboarding, additional training, whatever it might be. Kathy, we are running out of time. Our friends here on the call are probably running out of patience. And so I want to go to the very next slide. Is that an image that you see, Kathy?
Yes.
And Jason and all? Okay, this is Robert Kennedy. And Robert Kennedy used to say, some people see things the way they are and ask why. I dream things that never were and say, why not? Well, folks, we want to close today simply by offering our wish to you that you spend the rest of your lives saying, why not too? Why not have a successful and rewarding career? Why not travel and see the world? Why not participate fully in the safe, inclusive, and accessible environments of your choice? Why not take full advantage and enjoy all the benefits and privileges of life in this, the greatest of all societies? Why not? Why not indeed, folks? we wish you the very best in everything you do. Jason, Kathy, any closing remarks before we let everybody get on with the rest of their afternoon?
You will receive an evaluation to your email since you registered and participated. Really appreciate if you all would fill that out so we can get our numbers and figure out what we can do to improve things next time. And I appreciate all the participants and everybody that added to the conversation.
Thank you all. Great pleasure.
All right,
Jason, Kathy, as always.
Thank you.
all right, we'll see you guys in December.
It's a date.